the panel and I have got a lot of combined experience in the SEO world. Probably Mike and I have just a couple of extra years on David, and James, I don't know exactly when you got started, but you don't have as many wrinkles as we do, so perhaps not quite as...
1995.
So yeah, I started doing SEO probably in late 94 or early 95. I did it in 1996. So back when Mike Grehan and I started doing SEO, this was pre-Google, right? So it was all the Excite, InfoSeek, Lycos, so the earlier brands. And so things have changed a lot, obviously, since then. But I thought, just for fun, I would ask ChatGPT sort of what the primary ranking factors are for things. And I didn't anticipate I'd have enough of these to give to everyone, but it looks like I probably will. But we'll make use of this content after the fact. But I'll let each of us do a self-introduction as well. I've been in SEO for a long time, but in addition to owning the eMarketing Association, did it in 1996 as an SEO technology firm, got into paid search, and then eventually made 11 acquisitions to become a full-service marketing agency. But I still like to keep my hands pretty dirty as it relates to SEO and digital marketing as a whole. I even bought a brand, Truth Nutrition, so I could run experiments that are way too crazy to ask a client to run. So that's sort of fun. So why don't we start with Mike and give a quick 1 minute or thereabouts intro.
1 minute, yeah, my wife would say you'll be lucky. So I came online in 1995, and there was no such thing as SEO then. It was like email was the big deal back then. So it took a little while, but by 1997, I had an agency that was doing nothing but SEO, even though it wasn't called SEO back then. I mean, it just didn't have a name, it was crazy Bruce Clare, I think, who called it search engine optimization. Never liked that term. I've been in the industry for 30 years, never met anybody who's optimized a search engine. So why we call it that, I've got no idea. And why we're looking for another name or an acronym for what we're doing here, and I'm going to talk more about that, but I have no idea. I started an internet marketing agency back in the 90s. I sold it to a guy called Frederick Marchini in early 2000. He's the founder of a company called iProspect. I wrote the first book on SEO 27 years ago or something, and that's how I just ended up here in the US. In between times, I became publisher of Search Engine Watch, which was the biggest publication for search marketers. Back then, I was the publisher of ClickZ, the producer of SES Conference and Expo, and I eventually went on to become the chairman of the Global Association for Search Marketers. And then this year I had my 70th birthday and I'm retiring.
Go ahead, James.
I'm James, co-founder, CEO at Profound. My background is definitely not in SEO. We are a VC-backed tech startup based in Union Square. We're a team of 23 now, mostly engineers, so folks from Uber, AMD, Microsoft, Bridgewater, we're building a marketing platform to help brands understand and control how they show up on the new generative internet or the agentic internet. We launched in August of last year, and we're working with a lot of the big Fortune 500 brands predominantly right now, just trying to build good technology.
Nice. I'm excited for this. I'm David Berkowitz. Good to see a lot of familiar faces here. And I got my entree into SEO actually when I was at eMarketer 01 to 04, and I was doing the long form interviews, including with Kevin and Freddie Marchini and Jeff Herzog, who was at iCrossing, and wound up hiring me to go and run their corporate marketing, because I was just learning so, like, all the stories I was getting pitched were like SEO is a thing, right? And like, how do I understand this better? And so then I ended up working for iCrossing and 360i, that both started as SEO firms and expanded, and then along the way my own interests and experience expanded, and so done a lot of marketing, done a lot of community building, and then a couple of years ago, being on this innovation path, I combined a few interests and launched AI Marketers Guild. For like the first time, I actually remember to bring my book just as proof that it exists, because Mike wrote one of the earliest books, and I wrote one of the newer ones.
Kept me going for 18 years, best of luck, buddy.
Yeah, well, it's nice to have a prop behind my.
I bought it, by the way. It's a good book.
Thank you. Behind the Zoom in the office now, I have a bunch of these on the shelves. But just being able to continually learn from my community, there are community members in the room, and people like those on this panel in terms of how to apply AI, and also, I mean, I think that there's so much fascinating right now in terms of what's totally new, what's like the world has changed, is never going back, and what's the stuff that we've been doing since 94, 95, 2000 that we just got to keep doing more of it, so, yeah.
Frederick and I are still pals, by the way, but he's still $50 million richer than me.
So let's start with sort of the convergence of search, right? I mean, the lines between what is a search engine and what is a chatbot are blurring quite rapidly. Between Perplexity adding links and ChatGPT adding links and things sort of really blurring, and of course Gemini becoming often part of a Google search engine result page. So, visibility optimization for marketers who are trying to think about how do they optimize their visibility in whatever we call those things where people go to find more information. The algorithms that are powering sort of LLM-powered results are quite different than the algorithms that Bing and Google use. And I know Mike Grehan and I had a conversation probably 2 years ago about how all the indicators pointed towards digital PR and PR being more important than ever, and content syndication being more important than ever. But I took the liberty of asking ChatGPT earlier what's super important, and we can go over some of the elements of what Chat talks about for itself and for Google, including things like making sure that your content is up on authoritative sites. So that would tend to have Chat agreeing with this idea that digital PR and syndicated content are important. But let's start with you, James, because you're essentially trying to build technology that assists marketers in improving their visibility in generative engines. So how did you and your engineering team approach this challenge of both monitoring and improving visibility?
I mean, the difference, I guess, I mean, there's lots of fundamental differences, but I think the fact that these models are probabilistic by nature, so that there is no predetermined outcome, means that you, as a brand or as a marketer, will want to run high volumes of queries to understand kind of the median outcome or the median response. So, if we could ask 10, I was going to say 10 different questions, but you could ask 10 of the same question of, what's the best SUV for a family of 4, and you'll notice that you get different results each time. So we're building technology that interrogates the major models like ChatGPT, Perplexity, Copilot, Gemini in high volume and high breadth to understand how they talk about brands, competitors, industries at scale. We send prompts from different regions, different personas to understand kind of how that changes, and then we obviously look at the sources and citations that they're using to answer those questions. So it's kind of thinking of it as like the diet of the LLM-based response. I think the fundamental, I mean, there's lots of like tactical differences that I'm sure these guys would be, very well suited to talk to, but I'd say the sort of like wide aperture, sort of primitive difference that we know is that traditional search was more like a marketplace where the consumer, essentially the Google index just connected the consumer with the brand's website. In this new world, the answer engine, the interface, let's just say ChatGPT as the example, kind of captures that relationship with the end consumer. So me as a consumer, I actually no longer need to visit the car company's website. I can just follow up with ChatGPT. And we've seen obviously OpenAI introduce shopping last week. They just hired the CEO of Instacart as a push into the affiliate marketing. So I think we're going to see something very different unfold this time round. And I think that the mistake here is seeing this as just an interface change between the old world and the new. I think there's like paradigm differences.
Completely. Now, I've been a member of ACM, which is the world's largest computing society. Inside ACM, they have a special group, special interest group for information retrieval. And when I wrote the first book on SEO, I connected it to the science of information retrieval, which is a subset of artificial intelligence, as an umbrella term as it is. If you take a look at the way that Google and most companies that are involved in this space now have viewed information retrieval, it comes in many different forms. So the difference between information retrieval and data retrieval, to begin with, is data retrieval is specific. Yeah, it has to be absolutely connected to the query and whatever database it is that you're querying. Whereas information retrieval is about a subject, which is why over the years you saw what happened in Google is that it was specifically keyword based. Forget the notion of the power of the keyword these days, but the keyword had to appear on a page, otherwise you wouldn't see that web page, and it was so limiting. So over the years, Google and other technology companies have been looking at better ways to understand what it is that you actually want, because if you think about this philosophically, if people actually knew what they want, they wouldn't need a search engine. So part of the problem that you've got is that the query actually starts with a problem, not a solution. So they have to figure that out. So again, I think understanding intent, but without going on for too long about the differences, you said probabilistic before. One of the things with RAG, retrieval augmented generative results, that you can take a look at what you actually know about the language within the model, yes, and then you can actually take some further time analysis of how fresh the data is and actually add to it even fresher data, But the one thing that I think that is important, and I will shut up after this, is that I am fortunate, this new show that I started, which you must watch, I actually do manage to get, like, for instance, I had John Muller from Google, and he's kind of the voice of the SEO world over at Google. And he was trying to say, don't race ahead, trying to get ahead of the game, because what they're doing, again, is augmenting the results. So when you're doing good SEO and you're creating content that is right already for the end user, this thing called EAT, where you have the experience, the authority, and the trust that goes with it, Google already has the picking order of where they can go in order to be able to validate the results they're giving in AI, because they've got a ranking system. Now looking at what you guys are doing to figure out, because generally speaking with text, the ranking system was TDIF, just looking at the pure connection between words and the vector space model. It's a different conversation. But you are kind of limited to just looking at text and then trying to find a ranking factor purely around the text.
Well, I mean, there's a lot that's already covered. I mean, one thing we didn't yet and can and that I still want to keep diving into is the whole idea of following the money. And it just came up, I was giving a talk a couple of days ago, and there was a brand in the room who was saying, well, it's like, I'm paying so much more attention to Reddit now. Like, we never touch Reddit, we never care, and then very traditional brands. And it's like now we care so much more about Reddit because of how it's doing with AI. And I'm like, well, Reddit is now having their AI deals actually show up in that other tab in their earnings reports, and like, so Reddit advertising is still massively bigger than that other bucket, but that other bucket is growing really fast because they're selling their very well organized data to some very hungry
Sorry, go ahead and finish.
to some very hungry LLMs. And so this is also where we wind up in a there are definitely some downsides and some sad aspects to this, like rich get richer nature of it, where those that have amassed a lot of data and can package it in the right way to sell it to the LLMs, now that's going to impact the user experience and the kinds of information that people are able to retrieve. And so Reddit, which has been a source of authority, sometimes loved and hated over the years, but pretty important for a pretty long time. Its influence just increased exponentially because they're in this pole position.
The relationship that they have with Google. So one of the things that Kevin and I discussed the last time around, and kind of just what I was touching on here, when you were just looking at keywords, then you would write and put keyword. Everybody said SEO is about having keywords in here and make sure you use this keyword. I said to Kevin some time ago, write as you speak, because we're moving away from just trying to understand a keyword, okay? And with sentence transformers, okay, they're trying to figure out the meaning, okay, the context behind a sentence, and then use these vector embeddings that make it easier to understand what the query is and find a similarity value there, Mm-hmm. And I think the thing with Reddit is it's user-generated content. It's people writing as they speak. So if you're shifting away from purely this vector-based thing, which was just about keywords, and then looking to sentence transformers, then you have a great database of people writing as they speak. Mm-hmm. Now we're talking more about natural language processing.
So I'll pass along what ChatGPT said about itself as it relates to things that are important to do in order to rank. And I think as SEOs or as an SEO community, one of the things that's super interesting as we read through these, and we can go through them if we want into greater detail, is that some of the things that are listed here as ChatGPT calling really, really important are things that have fallen in and out of favor within the SEO community over the years. Whereas at certain points, guest posting was the hottest thing ever. And then all of a sudden it became passe, right? No, it was, oh no, don't do that. And even some of the folks at Google were starting to sort of indicate that perhaps guest posting was a bad thing. And business directories, right? Their first listing is things like Capterra and G2, as far as authoritative sites and being mentioned there and having content there that educates the LLM on what a business does and the problems that it solves, really is interesting to us as SEOs from way back, because as we sort of go through these recommendations, some of them are still very much in the forefront of what good SEO would be considered, like having good schema and structured information on your site so that the crawlers can understand your site and can understand your content. But I focused a lot on the query that I asked ChatGPT more about, outside of the domain itself, right? Where should great content be in order to influence what the LLMs know about your business and how they respond? And so I'll share this separately, this document separately with some additional commentary from me and based on our discussions. But I'd love for you guys to comment on this interesting information asymmetry, right? Because Reddit, for example, is being extremely careful and now deciding perhaps I don't want every LLM to have access to my information. And then you've got other sort of information as we speak, transcripts of YouTube videos, for example. So if we take this talk here and we post it up on YouTube, Google will transcribe it. But Google may not let ChatGPT see it, especially if ChatGPT adheres to robots.txt, which it's supposed to. So that will mean there's an information asymmetry between information Google has for Gemini and information that ChatGPT has. And then Claude is out there, and obviously there's a bunch of others that are coming up, and including open source and X having its its own AI. So what are the implications, both from the perspective of content creation and syndication, but also from understanding this asymmetry of where the content is syndicated and where it lives?
Well, I mean, just first couple points that I want to run with are first of all, like all this stuff, yes, I mean, it tracks, but most important is to see what tracks for you. Right? And so I did this, for instance, like where I was working with a business intelligence consulting firm, and I went in and I went into ChatGPT and I said, instead of saying, what do you know about this firm, right? Like our first inclination usually is to look for the brand terms, right? But then just remembering, I know this sounds super basic, but it's so easy to forget to do, to look up the non-brand terms. So I started looking up things like even, they're a small company, so I wanted to be very, very precise, like, business intelligence consulting firm, Boston. And so you look at this list here, right? Like I was looking at, a bunch of these companies I wasn't that familiar with. And sometimes the LLMs are really good about being upfront and revealing their sources. Sometimes you have to pry them a little bit, but most of the major LLMs will do so. And so if you then see like Clutch is one of the top sources here. Like I know G2 and Capterra, I wasn't familiar with Clutch. Clutch was actually powering so much of the influence behind their competitors. So maybe for someone else it's G2 or the Wall Street Journal, for this company, like the thing I did that day was set up a profile on Clutch. And so just getting a sense of using non-brand terms that relate to your business, your account, your client, and then just following the sources, and I think using tools like Profound, once you start getting there, then you can be a much smarter client of someone like Profound and really dig in and start tracking this across. That's like the tip of the iceberg, but it's a really important tip. And then you see what this baby can do, and you use a real optimization engine like yours.
It's fascinating that for certain queries, there seems to be a real bias towards or a requirement or a preference for ChatGPT in particular, and some of the others, to use listicles to decide, right? Especially when you ask.
Big on that, yeah.
Yeah, so when you ask what are the best or what are the most biggest or whatever, you can actually see these generative engines go out and search the web before they decide. So of course, when they search the web, then they're actually almost doing what a human would do, right? Well, how would the human answer that question pre-LLM? They'd go ask Google or Bing, what are the largest, what are the best, what are the most influential, whatever the question was. And then there would be a bunch of listicles that had been written, either very spammy listicles or legit listicles. Hard to tell the difference, right? Some of those listicles, somewhere on the page, may say the word ad or advertorial or sponsored content. I'm not so sure that ChatGPT understands those nuances, especially when the publisher chooses to put the word advertorial in an image that isn't alt tagged, right? So is ChatGPT going to bother to do OCR?
Yeah. The difference is it's not a search engine crawling the web and all of the data that Google has got. The reason you see the listicles, and I used to use this way back in the day when it was just about keywords, because in information retrieval science, co-citation is really important. Citation is fine, but co-citation, and that's what you see in lists. So Google has always been able to say, sometimes I see Boston Globe, and then right next to that I see New York Times, and I see Wall Street Journal, or these have all got something in common kind of thing, yes? So when you do see that co-citation, that kind of double confirms from a ranking point of view that there is a connection between them. And this is the problem that, I don't know how you guys are handling this, but it's easy enough to find a similarity score, but then how do you rank that, especially when you've got like a dead heat, and so close in a similarity score. So one of the things that Google did, and this is really important even now, as it was back then, that you need that authority that you don't bestow on yourself. It comes from other people, and in SEO it comes from links. Because you can write on your page, we are the world's greatest consulting firm in Boston, blah, blah, blah. Philosophically, what technology is going to do is say, and who else thinks so? And that's why looking at linkage data, particularly where the link anchor text has exactly the same terms as the query, okay? Now that they can say, well, obviously the people around you, and then the final hurdle is to make sure that the end user thinks the linkage data is right, and then just looking at how often and the patterns of retrieval. So I think now the whole idea, again, like you say, is that if you're not looking at linkage data, because that was one of the most important ranking factors from a PR point of view, this is where we started, okay? How did you know whether your PR was being effective? Well, you had to look and see how many column inches you got and where it was being mentioned. And not only that, the authority of the publication that you were being mentioned in, And certainly I think LLMs have a much better way of being able to do that now than just having to go out and re-crawl the web and build up a massive linkage database. I mean, just to give you an indication, Google has already seen 7 trillion URLs, okay? There's more than that, but they've already seen 7 trillion that they will never be able to crawl the entire World Wide Web. But people think they have access to it. They have a fraction of the World Wide Web. And if they tried to crawl to the very end, to every single, we'd all be dead before they got there. And that's why it's important to look at how frequently pages are being crawled, how often they're being accessed by the end user, yeah, how relevant they are, and look at that linkage data. And that sounds very complex in technology, but most of it was taken from library sites. When a new library book comes out, everybody wants to get it, it's right at the front, and when it becomes less popular, it goes a bit to the back. When nobody cares, it gets thrown out the back window, kind of thing. Well, your content is the same. So looking at a temporal analysis, how frequently is the content being created, and how frequently are you getting these citations or links, which are basically citations anyway.
So I'd love to get everyone's thought. You know, my team and I are generally trying to advise our clients who are interested in future-proofing their visibility across whatever engine is being used at the sort of Venn diagram intersection between best practices in SEO and best practices in sort of digital content creation and syndication that might look like digital PR or whatever you want to call it, right? Because you can obviously not ignore the 10 blue links quite yet, right? But you have to future-proof. And so there is this overlap between best practices in SEO and best practices in future-proofing your visibility for a generative engine. Oddly enough, it looks a little like what we used to call barnacle SEO, right? Which was sort of oddly named. We come up with a lot of things that make no sense to a layperson. But this idea that, well, there's more than just 10 listings in a search result, and so how do I deal with those other 9, even if I rank number 1 for something? That looks a lot like the kind of digital PR that might influence LLM. So I'd actually love James's opinion first on that mindset, right? This idea that, well, I have other content that can be hypothetically at least used to influence, you know, a vector database or an LLM database that is looking at similarities and confirmatory information about a company, what it does, and the problems that it solves. Do you sort of feel like that is the intersection, that Venn diagram intersection between old school SEO and visibility optimization in the future?
I mean, I probably wouldn't, I mean, I would delineate as well, like influencing the large language model. I think it depends if we're using large language model in the literal sense, or if we're just using it as a kind of generalized, you know, we would refer to an answer engine like ChatGPT, which utilizes an LLM with web retrieval. But yeah, I would probably steer away from trying to influence the pre-training of an LLM because it's pretty untractable. In terms of influencing the diet of the large language model, you know, 'cause the LLM is being used like a reasoning engine to decide which web pages to use to answer its question. And when we're looking at the latest models like O3, ChatGPT's latest model, we're seeing them use maybe 50 or 100 sources to answer like one question. The things that matter today probably won't matter tomorrow. But yeah, we're seeing things. We did like a study on, we looked at 177 million citations across like commercial prompts that we'd sent. And backlinks didn't matter, traffic didn't really matter that much. There's some sort of loose correlation with like obviously the page has to index for it to be pulled in, but we know these models are they're developing their own indexes now. They have their own indexes and overlay. Things like URL structure, like semantic value, that's like, I think, to my understanding, that's like old school SEO stuff, but just like, you know, semantic slugs on the URL, because the models are quite lazy and they'll just want to skim the URL first to use it as a quick heuristic. Looking at the metadata, so yeah, you know, models will cheat and look at the metadata on the page just to quickly figure out if the page is worth using as a source or a citation. And then yeah, there's like new stuff like the LLMs.txt protocol, which is like we're seeing that get some like pretty interesting usage. But yeah, I mean, I think it's the interesting thing.
It has to come from elsewhere, and so in citation analysis, which goes back a very long way, it was used in scientific papers to see which paper appeared in which journal. But the interesting thing about that is, again, it's like links. You can go, oh, well, this paper had more links than the other guy's paper. But in the 60s in citation analysis, they added something which rarely gets talked about in SEO terms now, but prestige analysis. And that's about where the link came from. Yeah. So if your paper appears in a more prestigious scientific journal, then it should get a bigger score than any guys who just turned up in the school newsletter or something like that. So again, you know, because in citation analysis there is a way of adding this prestige score, that when you eventually look at what is being given to you as, you know, I need an opinion, well, there are a number of authoritative sources that have been brought together by to give it this result.
These models are being used for a different kind of search, which is what we think is quite interesting. Like you know, people asking opinions. So, you know, should I upgrade my iPhone? Instead of going through articles and reading third-party opinions, that it's like ChatGPT will answer as like a monolithic voice, which is pretty interesting.
So for information, if you take the taxonomy of search, which is informational, navigational, transactional, it's the end user who's deciding who they want to provide the information. I mean, satisfying the information need of the end user is the most important thing.
I have a question around like the authority piece, because James, if the ChatGPT becomes monolithic and in a way you start trusting ChatGPT more and developing an emotional relationship, for example, how are you thinking about like the influencer kind of like co-signing on products, or even like a Wirecutter, for example, where they're a trusted authority due to curation, or the strategist? Like, do you see a world, I guess this is for everyone, where like the opinion of like a influencer or a curator, tastemaker ends up becoming more diluted as you start to develop a relationship with like a monolithic voice from a, you know, AI model?
Go back to what I was saying before about authority. Again, in information retrieval terms, it's a really important thing, and you don't bestow authority on yourself. Yes? It has to come from elsewhere, and so in citation analysis, which goes back a very long way, it was used in scientific papers to see which paper appeared in which journal. But the interesting thing about that is, again, it's like links. You can go, oh, well, this paper had more links than the other guy's paper. But in the 60s in citation analysis, they added something which rarely gets talked about in SEO terms now, but prestige analysis. And that's about where the link came from. Yeah. So if your paper appears in a more prestigious scientific journal, then it should get a bigger score than any guys who just turned up in the school newsletter or something like that. So again, you know, because in citation analysis there is a way of adding this prestige score, that when you eventually look at what is being given to you as, you know, I need an opinion, well, there are a number of authoritative sources that have been brought together by to give it this result. So again, you know, it's like the PR thing, you know, if you've got the Wikipedia thing is still really important, you know, those kind of things. What's the source of the information? How valuable, how trusted is the source of the information that we're going to use to provide you with the answer that you need to see, you know?
Well,
Go ahead. I was going to say the fascinating thing about James's data is that it seems like the LLMs are a little bit lazy, right? So they're actually trying to use as little of the information from the website as possible, like looking at things like URL structure, looking at things like meta description, which of course, you know, we all sort of gave up on meta description, or at least meta keywords a long time ago. And we still know meta description helps because it often becomes a snippet. But if ChatGPT is like a lazy searcher, right, then we have to think about content creation and content syndication through that lens, and not necessarily treat long form and short form content the same, and think about abstracts of content and where those abstracts might sit. But the other thing that's, I think, really fascinating that relates to Bo's question is, if you sort of think about the old construct of what SEOs believed, which may or may not have been true, but that it was the domain name that conveyed the authority, right? You think about Wirecutter and the New York Times, okay, they conveyed authority in sort of previous ways as the New York Times. But the reality is the New York Times has a lot of authors, right? And so the authors and their individual skill levels and their individual knowledge levels may bring back this idea of sort of the author tag, which came and went in the SEO community, and isn't really seen as a major factor now. But if you think about the social media construct, right? The Kardashians, okay, do they have prestige? Depends who you ask, right? And so when a crawler crawls content that's been created by a Kardashian, how is that treated, right? And James may be able to tell you that, right? And are they looked at in the same way that the New York Times is looked at, or are they looked at in the same way that a specific author from the New York Times is looked at, who may also have an X account, who may also have a TikTok, who may also post on YouTube, right? And now individual authors often have different places that they syndicate their content. So this influence idea that you sort of brought up tangentially could end up being really important, because Mr. Beast is an important person, right?
Yeah, and you're seeing journalists who leave these publications to start their own Substack, their own media companies, you know, Alex Conrad. It's like at a certain point, if you become so influential as an author, you don't need the corporate, you know.
Well, it works
domain
both ways,
anymore.
because I know a lot of journalists who just got canned and then started their own, you know, they were writing for Wall Street Journal and start their own blog or their own website, and they don't have the power of the publisher. And I keep thinking we using the term author all of the time. The publisher is frequently the author, because the New York Times doesn't lose its prestige. And if you're a journalist there and you go and start your own thing, Substack or something like that, and you take your own following and build up your own, but you lost the prestige that still remains with the New York Times.
Well, you know, we're talking a lot about prestige, but I think there's one other factor that's getting overlooked here, and that's time. I'm going to make up a stat right now, but it's the internet, so maybe I could get into ChatGPT somewhere. That even for active AI users, these AI engines, 95 to 99% of their time is not spent on these services, right? So the vast majority of time, they'll be influenced elsewhere. And so if they're constantly seeing ads or content from Wirecutter, and this becomes important to them, or they're seeing the Kardashians or some 1,000-follower influencer who gets into their feed that they're then being influenced by. First of all, that means that there are ways to influence them, even when they're also looking for related things in these AI engines. And secondly, when Wirecutter comes up as a source in the LM and saying that this Hewlett-Packard printer was the top-rated one in Wirecutter, like, if you haven't heard of Wirecutter before, that's not really going to mean anything to you. If you have, it's probably going to mean a lot to you, and so then it gives you some kind of context, and odds are, as the personalization keeps getting better, like Gemini in particular, their 2.5 model, it keeps bringing up references to my daughter and clients, even when I never ask, even when the query is for something totally different. It'll tell me that like, this is actually something that your daughter would be interested in too. And by the way, she's like she's exposed to some different sources of brand. Like, I literally had a conversation about branded content, and it's comparing her take to mine most likely. So it's making this very nuanced. But there's still this, like, okay, you know, what does influence mean? And also, I think so many brands and marketers in general are going to go back to these fundamentals of, like, let's say we're losing the LLM race, right? Let's say we're not the most optimized brand for it. Where else can we be putting our bets and spending our time? And fact is, you can reach people in that, like, 90+% of time that they're not spent on
It's
AI.
fascinating though, David, what you said, because what I was saying earlier on is and I've had to say this over and over again, if you knew what you wanted, you wouldn't need a search engine. So most people who start their journey with a search engine are starting with a problem, not a solution. That's why you should be writing about the problem first, not the solution. Because if you knew what it was, you wouldn't need a search engine. But that, what you've just seen from the LLM there is the same thing on steroids. If you knew what you wanted, the LLM is actually telling you, no, this is what you were thinking about. And that's all based on your behavior.
Yeah.
David's point also brings up a twist that we hadn't really talked about, which is the hyper-personalization of results based on who's asking, right? And the SEO industry has already been struggling to some extent with some level of personalization, although there was, at least in theory, a generic SERP, right? There's an entire industry of search engine ranking tools that we knew were wrong, but for lack of a better set of tools,
You
we
have to
just
give something to the client.
yeah, you have to show them something, right? So, but it was directionally accurate, right? It was wrong, but it had sort of, it showed you which way the wind was blowing. And so we all used those tools, and we used them, if we were smart, on a directional basis. But increasingly, based on your anecdote there, right? Your daughter using whatever she's using would end up seeing different things than you would,
Right.
if she was using her own device, or if it knew that she was logged in as her, right? And so that takes away this idea of sort of generalized visibility or generalized ranking, regardless of how you look at it. And so, James, I'd love your thoughts on how do we deal with this, the fact that increasingly, regardless of how many queries you throw into the AI, in order to determine sort of probabilistically, are you doing better or worse than you were last month, right? As things become more and more personalized, the golf enthusiast doing a search as it relates to a really great driver to use is probably going to see completely different things than someone who's as bad a golfer as I am, right? So
I have a great follow-up for you after this one.
So James, any thoughts on the hyper-personalization and how that changes how we should think about visibility?
Yeah, I mean, I think that memory in ChatGPT has the potential to make this software some of the stickiest software in the history of software. There's basically zero chance of me switching to Gemini or Grok or Perplexity now because of the introduction of a more sophisticated memory system that OpenAI rolled out a few weeks ago is pretty awesome. In terms of how you look at that, the cool thing that I think is new now that kind of wasn't possible in the same way with traditional search is you can create system prompts effectively. So to use your golfing example, we would synthetically create 10,000 system prompts for maybe, I don't know, men between the ages of 30 to 45 with an interest in golf, and then send the prompt with, asking as that person. You send, essentially like persona-based prompting that will get different results. So you can start, you can kind of like tailor the prompts to the persona.
Yeah, that's an interesting way to solve the hyper-personalization data problem. Mike, you had a question?
Yeah, so what I'm thinking about, without getting too far, too advanced, but recently I was just talking about the fact that you can get these things for free at the moment, Gemini, but even ChatGPT said recently that they nearly blew up their server farm, all of the GPUs when they released the image model, and then he blew them up because it takes so much energy to create these things. Adobe did a study and said for them to generate just one image, it takes the same amount of power as it takes to charge an iPhone. So the overheads for these companies is absolutely massive. It's going to get bigger. But so the answer to that is actually transfer some of that processing back to the end user. So put the AI on the device. So now you've got a small language model on the device, and that's actually becoming much more hyper-personalized because it's only looking at your behavior, all of your behavior. Yeah. So in terms of edge computing, what it's actually doing is Google, Gemini, and ChatGPT are passing some of the processing costs back to you. So you'll be using more data on your phone to begin with, and it will have to be an up-to-date phone to be able to do that. So anyway, it's a long way around. But when it gets down to the AI small language model based around you personally, on a device, how are we going to be able to manage to influence that?
Yeah,
Clearly.
I don't know. Maybe we don't.
You want something to think about for your next iteration.
But it's also that's those are the big reasons why you probably see more of a push from basically all the major LLMs to go and have their app installed on your laptop and on your phone, right? And so there's the compute challenge, but then it's also then all of that data they have of these are the kinds of things you're putting in your PowerPoint. And
Yeah, but there's a
things
slight
like that.
difference there in the difference between just having an app on the phone as opposed to having a chip that's sitting with the AI
sure.
and processing that, But
Oh
that
yeah,
is going
much
to be the
deeper
future.
level. Yeah.
And that's part of the thing that you've got to think about. I mean, because we're geeks talking about it up here, we should have just sat at the bar because we've lost our audience a couple of times, I think. we are getting ahead. One of the problems that we've got is it's talking about what's the best model to use right now so I can get the best SEO and the best out of the AI overview, that kind of thing, because in a year from now, will many people have Apple AI, Apple Intelligence on their phone? Maybe they will upgrade and do that. But for many people, they're still going to be sitting with their iPhone 11 that can't do that. So they're going to just rely on going to Google like they did before. They're not all tech-oriented people, So Google's not dead yet. SEO is not dead yet, believe me. But for a lot of people who are a bit more adventurous with their devices, they might be getting a much richer end-user experience than the other person.
So some of the folks in the
Was
audience
that
and
recorded,
watching
by
this,
the way? I'd like to use that as an answer to one of the questions.
so a bunch of folks here, as well as watching the recording of this, are going to probably ask themselves, well, what do I do now, right?
Yep.
Because they all have capital constraints, both dollar capital and human capital constraints. And they're being told by their bosses, well, I still want to rank in Google and Bing, but I'm a little worried about, our visibility in the future. So they need to know how to allocate the human capital, how to allocate the dollar capital internally or externally to make sure that their visibility is assured in the future, right? So what would your recommendation be to them to sort of future-proof visibility?
Yeah, well, I still start with the present-proof visibility. Like James said, knowing what factor is going to, be most relevant 6 days from now, let alone 6 months from now, can be pretty tricky. So some of the basics of, again, just like looking at the non-brand terms, following the sources, just doing a bit of homework. Now, there's so much that a relative lay person in the business world can do themselves and start making some educated recommendations. And also what I've seen, I haven't gone in depth in Profound's case here, but a lot of the players in your class are designed for companies that don't necessarily have those enterprise budgets. And so getting started on advanced tech can cost in the tens or hundreds of dollars a month a lot of the time. And yes, there's often need to upgrade that. I don't want to sell you short here for your enterprise plans, but there's so much you can do that you can, just expense or shoot first and ask later a lot of the time, rather than have some massive RFP process. Just to try some of these kinds of tools like Profound out there, because they are accessible and they're getting so much smarter by the day. It's my
Any
pleasure.
additional comments, James?
Send me the invoice afterwards.
Okay.
Yeah, I gotta send him some kickback.
I think if you just go back to the original advertising and PR model where we started, and then instead of thinking about SEO as being something outside of your marketing operation, and then, a lot of the companies that I've been dealing with, much larger companies, global enterprise, don't even see or beginning to feel they don't need a specialist SEO group or a specialist SEO company. They want it to be inside the marketing department. So I think the more you think about integrated marketing, how does everything that I'm doing right now with my SEO tie in with my paid search media, offline, online, everything, where all of these influences can come from, So think more about integrated marketing, and certainly from an SEO point of view, to stop thinking about just the keyword. If you think about this, a lot of the searches that you do now The keyword may not even appear in the result, but the result is just a yellow highlighted sentence on a page. It's not even the entire web page now. It's just the, so in terms of being able to get that similarity score that's necessary, it's about the relevance of the content. And crazy as it may seem, is just create better content.
Yeah.
So the follow-up question for that is, as it relates to either AI generated or AI assisted content, the cost of content is rapidly approaching zero, which has all sorts of implications to journalists, of course, but also has implications to marketers who are trying to decide, who's going to be creating this content, who's going to be creating the blog posts, who's going to be creating the content that we post, who's going to be writing the press releases or editing the press releases. And sort of everyone within the SEO industry, and probably everyone else as well, has an opinion as to whether or not Google and Bing, as well as the LLMs, have a sort of bias or preference one way or another for human-generated conversational content, which of course this transcript will be when it shows up on the YouTube transcript, versus something that was created with the heavy assistance of an LLM itself. So any thoughts on whether or not marketers should be careful in how they generate content?
So, without again using up all the oxygen, but it is such a, the subject, you can get so passionate about it now, but the fact of the matter still remains. I mentioned temporal analysis before. It's become so important what does temporal analysis means. It means just looking at the timing of things. Even the fresher the link, if you're looking at link-based algorithms, the fresher the link, the fresher the link, the more relevant that it's likely to be. So if you're saying that journalists are not going to need to write their columns anymore because LLMs are going to do it, where are they going to get the information from? How are they going to be trained? How do you train the LLM? It's only learning its stuff from all of the new stuff. Now, if the LLM doesn't learn from what the journalist has been writing, you're going to keep getting yesterday's news, the week before's news. If you think about this, when ChatGPT first started, there were quite a few queries that I put in there, or prompts that I put in there that it couldn't answer because the crawl was 2 years old. And some of the stuff I was asking about, according to it, hadn't happened in history yet, so.
Well, yeah, I mean, the one that I'll say that I feel kind of dirty saying, and people are going to disagree with and be a little controversial, but it's based on professional experience. Because I've worked with a client recently where there weren't a lot of resources. They've got a very old school SEO team in another country doing a lot of just like guest posting, some paid and backlinking, and then they started using some just purely SEO generated content, and I've been astounded how well it's ranking. It should not rank for some of the terms that it's ranking for, and it's also another pretty small business without a lot of clout, and it's showing up for things, and this is in part using some of the new models like Gemini 2.5 that can not only do things like, again, like very old school stuff like keyword density, whether or not it matters. I'm not the expert on some of the technical aspects of it.
No, it doesn't.
Okay, but this is what this shop is. All I know is that this company, and it can do things like internal linking and external linking and stuff that these engines could not do a few weeks ago from Tessa was running. And so some of the like quick and dirty, like I just say that if you're going to rule out, say like AI engines are going to penalize AI generated content, I'm sure as hell not convinced because I'm getting proved otherwise. So it's like, got to test and learn here.
The question is, Mommy, where does content come from?
Mm-hmm.
So what are you going to do if somebody switched the World Wide Web off tomorrow and ChatGPT can't get access to that crawl data? Then it's just going to become staler and staler and staler. So, the point you were making before about a journalist is going to be out of business, a professional is going to be out of business. These machines they're called learning machines. They have to have something that you feed them so that they can learn. Mm-hmm. And if you cut off that feed to them, well, they're pretty useless after that,
But a lot of the info isn't like whether the Knicks won last night. Yeah. There's a lot of just like crap people need to produce so that the crap that the engines can consume and just get someone to the right place.
But we'll have to wait and see. It's certainly been a fascinating conversation, guys. Thanks for joining me and helping educate everyone on the next generation of visibility.
Thank
Thanks
you.
for having us.
Welcome, thoroughly enjoyed it. Let's all go to the pub and talk about AI. Come on.
Junior pubs.
Thanks for your
Yeah, great to meet you.
Thanks.
Thank you. It was a pleasure, yeah.